Howdy, folks. I'm Mark. Just me today. Doing another captain's log out here on the front porch on a Tuesday night. So thank you for joining me out here on this lovely night for this short talk about video games. Because you're listening to Quick Play. Let's get right into it. So I had really just kind of two things on my mind as I was thinking through what I wanted to say, and that is, well, one, the podcast just turned about 3 years old. Back in mid-May, May 11th is the big debut date, so it's going for 3 years now, which is really exciting. Alongside that, I also listened to a podcast episode from a grown-up podcast called Rebuilders. The episode's called The Age of Volatility. The podcast itself is from a church in Melbourne, Australia, kind of talking about church leadership. But in that particular episode, it's really hosted by this guy named Mark Sayers. He was talking about how we live in an age of volatility right now, kind of by nature of global shakeups. This feels a bit obvious. That's, of course, a volatile time, but particularly you have like Trump and Xi Jinping. I hope it's Xi Jinping, I think. Just both trying to upend the world and the whole world order for their country's benefit. That just naturally results in massive ripple effects throughout the economy or even culturally. On a smaller scale, I mean, in some way, because of this, like we've seen just massive instability in the video game industry, and that's what's happening, all over. But Mark Sayers kind of makes the point that even within volatility, stability becomes a very precious resource. So he points to the church as a source of stability. But also, I thought of routines and regular expectations as these kind of lesser sources of stability as well. So the church and spiritual disciplines are certainly a part of that stabilizing routine for me. But also I thought about some friends of ours who bought the local coffee shop and how their work at the coffee shop is kind of a stabilizing force for our community. But also it reinvigorated me for this podcast. Not in the sense that I'm trying to ramp into high gear, but more so that just it's an affirmation to keep at it. It also did make me appreciate video games more as a stabilizer themselves, and there are thousands of caveats I want to make with that. I think it has to be in a healthy place and the correct priority in your life. Time playing video games is really nice, but I want to hold that loosely. Escapism has its benefits, but it's not. I don't think it's a long-term good thing. It also doesn't replace human interaction. So all of those things, I think you get it. It's video games are fun and they're good, but we don't want to make them kind of top dog in our lives. But first, talking through video games themselves as stabilizing. So in some ways, games can show how we're really drawn to stability. I think I would say that they demonstrate how we enjoy stability rather than being an inherently beneficial practice of it. So, for instance, I will play games at the end of the day as a way to wind down or the reward of a job well done for the day. And I can get cranky if that doesn't happen for a while. And typically, if I don't have time to play games, it usually means I have no margin. There's just no free time at all. So having time to play games is, in one sense, just kind of means that things are in a good balance. Life is stable, especially if I'm not diving too far deep into games. And rest time activity can be different for all sorts of different people. Mine is just usually video games, and it's probably one of yours too if you're listening to this. But I also want to note too, it's also at its best when it is communal. That doesn't have to be, at all times. Video games are often restful for me because I am an introvert. But it is important to at least have a way to kind of share this with others too. And so for a lot of people, that's playing multiplayer games. For me, that's typically, playing single player games that I then talk about with others, usually on this podcast. But even having an outlet to talk about games just in a text group with friends provides accountability. And that's certainly true for me. And it's the accountability for it to not be insular, to not be, just stuck in the game itself. Winding down to this point, I do want to give credit where credit's due. I've stolen this mentality all from the Backlog Breakdown guys, Nate and Josh. They are really explicitly intentional about this approach to video games where you want to be mindful of how you consume these things and to critique them and process them and talk about them with others. They certainly be an inspiration. But also, I do want to shout out other friends who create stuff in this space, like Jake and Landry on the Bitcast. All these guys, I really listen to a lot of different conversational podcasts about video games, and it's fun to know all these guys who are just really thoughtful and really good at it. And also, there's plenty of other you folks out there that I talk to on and off podcasts that I just enjoy talking about it with. And that brings me to the second topic here, that this very podcast I'm thinking about as a source of stability. And from the beginning, this podcast has just been about fitting in time for this sort of stuff. That's 11 and a half minutes of time or longer, or sometimes shorter. Thinking about this podcast as a stabilizing force in my own life can be funny because it is certainly sometimes a burden to do. Whether I'm up late on a Tuesday night editing to get it out, or it's a burden to my wife, who is often sometimes left to put the kids to bed on her own because I scheduled a recording. But it is overall, it's been a fun and worthwhile outlet for myself. Just talk about games, and I think Sarah would agree too if you asked her on a good day. And it's a fun excuse to talk about games and make something out of it even. And hopefully the intention is to model these conversations that have some good questions, so that you can then go out and have these conversations of your own too. And I want to do this in ways that doesn't lean into clickbait or rage bait or hype trains. Certainly I have titles that will lean into that, and I understand I'm just trying to, sometimes it's even facetious and sometimes I'm trying to be clever with it, but that's hopefully not the end all be all of the episodes themselves. But I also think about, in the communal aspect, I think a lot about like the big discourse episodes and how sometimes I step back in the middle of those, and it's just a wild combination of bringing people together from a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different realms of life, and even just from all sorts of places for me, where I've got friends from college and even some from high school, like Kurt. I've got some I've met through podcasting. I've got some that live a few miles from me, and I've filmed some that live thousands of miles away. Or also like Nick Porch from Australia. It's really cool that games can be this common denominator for all these guests within a big discourse itself, or just also even among these one-off episodes, and also with all listeners. And so one of the biggest values that I hold with this podcast is I want to be consistent. That has gotten trickier. Sometimes I miss weeks. Lately, the episodes have just been going up late. But I don't want to miss weeks lightly. And the audience has grown, not exponentially, but it's been steady. And I love to see it grow more. That is not reaffirmation, where this is my outlet and I'm really enjoying making it, and that's its own affirmation. But the audience even with the very small and steady growth, it's been really consistent, and I'm really thankful for all of you listening to this. And I also think about it'll have to end at some point, but it's not this day. Because I kind of just like the idea of this podcast being here with anyone new who's finding Quick Play for the first time and seeing all these episodes in the feed week over week. Hopefully that's not overwhelming, but I do feel like I'm building something. I feel like I'm building something substantial. That's again, not marked by explosive growth, or at least not yet. But I do want to be marked by this consistent bricklaying of episode after episode. I would like to be in the realm of video game podcasts. I would like to be a non-anxious presence, to also borrow a Mark Sayers, that's that Rebuilders guy, one of his isms. And I'm certainly not the only one who does this. Like, obviously, I would mention the Backlog Breakdown guys and Jake and Landry and Nintendo Watcher guys. Watcher Gaming. All these guys that I know that who also model this well too. But also, I would like to see the show get better too. I don't want stability to mean stagnation, and I would love to be a better podcaster and a better host, and just try to talk real good and be better at that. But even with where it's been at, like I'm really kind of proud of this. So in this age of volatility, it does feel a little bit silly that a podcast like this could be a stabilizing force. I'm making entertainment about an entertainment medium, but I hope it's something that's predictable, and that's the aim: is to be restful and thoughtful with consistency. And so, whether you listen every week or every so often, I hope it's a restful spot for you, where you can think about something that you enjoy for a bit. And you can vicariously join a conversation about a mutual interest. And again, hopefully it inspires conversations and connection points of your own. Because it does that for me as I make it. And in all the ways that happens. I do think that this is a good thing to do in and of itself, but it's also it works for me as a practice of consistency for stability and other things, particularly for the greater things that are much better at being stabilizing forces than video games or podcasts about video games. And so, I mentioned disciplines of faith in Jesus, and ultimately I believe that faith in Christ is the stabilizing force, and I can enjoy like all the other silly little things in life, like video games and doing podcasts, because I believe that God is making all things new. And with that in mind, that I can, spend time doing this and spending time enjoying things in life. And that's kind of as far as I can go on laying this plane. So, yeah, thank you for listening. And if I stop and think about it, it gets real weird. It gets real wild to think about that I just post conversations about video games on the internet, and then other people listen to it. I know that's the whole point, but sometimes that feels weird, and it's an honor. And I will see you around. So, time is short. What am I playing? I'm still playing New Star GP. It's getting a little frustrating, so I think time is up on that one. We got Switch 2 coming out. That's also kind of was on my head of this big event on the horizon. This week is really exciting. And yeah, glad to have the podcast to talk about it. Well, thank you all for listening in. You can follow us on the major podcasting services or on YouTube. You can press all the good buttons if you enjoyed the conversation. And you can find us on the proper socials at Quick Play Pod, and let us know what is stabilizing for you. I'd be really curious to know. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks.